very, very honored to be here in Guilford. I think you're some of the smartest and most enlightened people on the planet. So I've been here many times, and between the green and this church, at the end of the green, and the beautiful homes and the Four Seasons, I just am thrilled to be here. So thank you, Lisa and Cindy and Shannon, for bringing me here and taking such good care of me. One of the greatest joys in my life was working in the prison system for adult, and I've also done many years with adjudicated youth. And I never wanted to go to a prison because they were all adults, and I felt more comfortable with the teenagers. Until I got older, and I realized the teenagers were now just the same, only they were called adults. So I broke through that, and I became an artist in residence in Pennsylvania, and I worked with county, state, federal, and immigration inmates. And when I first went in, I really thought I was going to be doing something for them. And I am the one, as Anna says in The King and I'm the one who learned. I started on a Sunday, and I was going to the Presbyterian Church in Scranton, Pennsylvania. So I went to church, and right before we left, they did the passing of the peace. And I was new at the church, so I didn't know everybody. And I remember kind of blushing, and we'd have to walk around and go, hi, and peace be with you. And I just remember kind of grinning because I felt self-conscious. And then immediately I got in my car and I went right down the street to the Lackawanna County Prison, which had all these different divisions in it. And I was told to bring my car keys and my driver's license. And I remember the man at the window barked at me and said, well, now, why didn't you bring that? And I said, well, I was told to bring, well, da, da, da. And he started talking to me, not the way the people at the First Presbyterian Church had talked to me. And then I had to go through different gates where they would shut behind me, like at the post office when you put your package in, and I'd go to another one. And then I walked down halls that were so waxed you could almost see yourself if you looked down. Everything was so stark. Everything was so polished and devoid of any clutter or life. And then they brought in my first group of inmates. And by the time that first class was over, I was a different person. Later, when we would do our performances in the chapel. Around the top of the chapel were really the only decoration in the prison I ever saw, and it was came to visit me in the prisons, and about what Christianity is all about. And I thought, yes, and I've never been here before. So I kept my eyes and my heart open, and as we worked, I would bring each class together, and we would start a conversation, and wherever that conversation led, that seemed to have some excitement or some passion or some true deep feeling, then we would start to explore. I started working with a visual artist, and she would have them paint or draw, or one time we did a calendar, and it was the most gorgeous thing you've ever seen. We did bookmarks. But I would take it and I would use their words and fashion a play, which we would then do for the other inmates, and then we would also bring in the community. And their stories, as the men were telling me their stories, they were Shakespearean. They were about walking into a bodega with their grandfather and being shot, and the grandfather being killed, and just a child. And they would be about the mother. It was like Hamlet. The mother had married the father's brother, and the father mysteriously died. And so all of a sudden I thought, this is Shakespeare, so why don't we just go to the source? And I remember I carried in this massive Shakespeare that my cousin Jack had given me. And I wasn't allowed to bring props or costumes or any other paperwork, but they said, what is that? And I said, it's Shakespeare. And they went, well, that's okay. Oh, the world that Shakespeare tells. And so as the men told their stories, I started incorporating where all of a sudden they would be performing Macbeth. Out of their own stories, it would become Julius Caesar. Out of their own stories, they would go into... And because it was Shakespeare, it elevated. And they knew it was difficult work. And it made them proud. And they were certainly to be applauded for what they accomplished. I remember when I was teaching them the sonnet, "Oh, to be in disgrace and fortune in men's eyes, and all alone beweep my outcast state, and trouble deaf heaven with my bootless cries, and look upon myself and curse my fate." And at the end, for that one person that for thy sweet love remembered, I would scorn to change my place with kings. And the man who performed the poem, we incorporated into the play, he pulled out a picture of his child and said, and this is her, this is Brianna. And then another man pulled out a picture of him and his wife, and somebody else pulled out a picture of his parents. And I've never felt Shakespeare come so alive for me. I'm going to let some of these pass around. I had 2 Vietnamese, I had a French Haitian, I had an African American man from Brooklyn, I had Hispanic and Hispanic. And they were all enemies when they came in. One man led the Muslim group at the church, at the prison, and he told me, I can't be a part of anything that isn't scholarly, I can't be around any music, and I kept saying, we don't have to have that. What else do you have to have? Well, we're going to have to do that. We have to do that. I want you in here. And some of them had been part of gangs where they just hated people just on sight. And the man who said he couldn't be part of any kind of frivolity, he wound up, I wanted to do a scene from Romeo and Juliet, and he had a Muslim beard, and no one would do it. They went, you kidding me? I'm not playing a woman in front of all the other guys. And he raised his hand and he said, I will. So we took a white sheer curtain and wrapped it around his beard. And of course the men laughed at first, but he did it so beautifully. And this is a picture of his Romeo reaching out to Juliet's hand. And with this prison bracelet on. And we can pass that back if you'd like. We did scenes from all the greats. One young man from Vietnamese descent, I asked him to memorize this much of Julius Caesar, and he memorized 4 pages of it. And when he started going, we all just sat back, and he kept going, and he kept going, and he kept going. And so, of course, we kept it all in. And they did let me bring, eventually, the sheer curtains. And this is not, this is a Xerox. But you can see how beautiful the staging was. And these, in the back of the house, when the community came in to see it, after Mark Antony's speech, the people are like, they're getting angry and they're getting ready to, rebel, and they're getting ready to do all of that. And the men in the back were so realistic. The people, there were 3 judges in the audience. They were looking like, are we okay? It was the most real and the most visceral and the most exciting theater you can imagine. We became so close, and much to my surprise, but like Jackie Cochran, it was only right, they feared me. And so we were having a dress rehearsal, and 2 of them didn't get the memo, and off they went to play basketball. And the guard came and said, I'm sorry, those two aren't here and they just won't be here. And I said, I must have them. And he said, Nancy, if I do this for you, it's the last time. And he went down and he pulled them off the basketball. They had a little area, completely walled, where they play basketball. And these two tough gang member guys came running up. And they were like, we didn't know, Miss Nancy, we didn't know. And at the end of it, they were so amazingly good that instead of a curtain call, we used the very end of the prophet about justice. If you want to really see where the blame lies, you have to lift the tapestry and look underneath, and you have to turn over the loom and look. You just can't say it's right here. And when Juba, who had been the one who played Juliet, when he was finished with it, all the men just took a step forward to be with him, and they just raised their heads, and that was their curtain call. And the audience went wild, and judges stood up and said, how can this be? And how did you feel about it before? And how do you feel about it now? And Juba said, they're my brothers. And they all tried to come in, and because he broke down and put their arms around him. It was the most, it changed me. It changed me forever. And then after the show was over, I said, let's all come together and have a little huddle, because we always huddled before and after. And the guard said, no, they have to go back right now. And I lifted my head out of the huddle and I went, we will have a moment. And then these are, there's my Romeo, and there's my Vietnamese, and there's my wonderful Suko. We became friends. All 8 of them were federal prisoners that went on, and a lot of them went on to the same federal prison. And they wrote me for a long time because I had photographs I wanted to send them, and I got to know their parents and their wives. And they said when they would see someone from the play, it would be like a college reunion, and they would hug. And one cell, they said, was just plastered with all the pictures of the play. And this young man took a lot of courses. And this is a picture of him with his dog training. And he would send me all his certificates in the mail so I would know how good he was doing. And we had artwork, this is called Lockdown, and one of our young men did the artwork. We had a lot of press. A lot of letters to the editor. Juba, the one who wasn't going to do anything frivolous, was released from prison and started a youth organization in Philadelphia. And he's been in touch with me. He truly turned his life around. And I stayed in touch with some of them. Will be serving time for the next 20 years. So I have to say that that experience for me opened my eyes to what is justice, what is love, what is forgiveness, what is redemption, and most of it had to do with me. You know, you walk around thinking you're a pretty darn good person until you come to a crossroads where all of that gets to a deeper level. Then I started working with the women, and while I was working with the women, I was diagnosed with a very serious illness, and they took care of me. I had a grandmother from Jamaica who was there because of immigration, and she put me in a corner and she said, I want you to know I've been talking to God, and God said you are not to worry. Do you hear me? And so when they called her Mother Janet, and they made this beautiful card before I went into New York to have surgery, and they said, you carry this in the operating room with you. Well, those little things they put on you, the ties on the back, but I kissed it and put it in my locker. And as soon as I could put one foot in front of the other, even going through chemo, I was back there every time, and they held me up. And and they took care of me. This beautiful young woman, I love her dearly, because we were doing a play, and she was scheduled to get out of prison sometime prior. And she went to the judge and begged him, could she stay in prison until the play was over? And at the performance, he stood up and said, in all my 30 years of being a judge, I have never had anyone beg to stay in prison for a few more weeks. And she got home on Thanksgiving Day, and when she came out into the lobby, all the guards and all the staff applauded her because they got to see her performance. And she called me Thanksgiving Day with her grandbaby on her lap and said she was home. The women I had were remarkable. Our first play was called Women on the Inside, Looking Up. And again, they let me bring in fabric, so I found out what their favorite colors were, and they had it hidden on them. And as the audience came in, they would be all around the room, and one would go, red, the color of blood, the color of bond. And another one would say, green, the color of money. And another one, pink, my daughter's favorite color. And they formed a tableau. And then they all told their stories. And at the end, we put on this really gorgeous, uplifting music. And they flew around the room with their scarves. And then at the very end, they posed. And I came down and took a picture of them, you know, as women on the inside looking up. And I've also worked with women out of prison. I did a show called We Rise based on the Maya Angelou poem. And I had these lovely co-eds at the University of Scranton who all had the beautiful long hair. And I had 3 women who had been in prison. And it started off, and it was so obvious who had been in prison and who hadn't. But at the end, they were one. It was the most amazing thing. So I will just pass them around like this. That's the audience. And we performed at the theater at the University of Scranton. And one of the women at the very end told me, the day before we did it, or that day, she said, the one had been in prison, she said, I can't do this, and I'm not going to do this, and I'm just not going to do it, and I'm not doing it, and I'm not getting up there, and I'm not doing it. And all the girls, all the co-eds were worried, like, what are we going to do? And I went out and I found her in the hall, and I said, that's okay, we just won't do it. And she said, what do you mean? I'm not doing it. You go ahead. And I said, we're not doing it without you. So we can go have lunch, we can go have dinner, whatever you want. And by the time we talked it over, she went, well, I'll do it. And so happy she did. One of our women did not go home to her mother's funeral. She had just been to Philly to visit her. She said, I serve her more by being here. So, any questions? Yes?
I'm going back to at the beginning, and like you've mentioned this a couple of times, but I'd like you to say more about after your first day, you were changed forever. Like, what changed?
Well, the guard came in, and he was about 6'5", and I had around 25 or 30 women in a circle with me. And he came in and he said, if one of you gets out of line, if I find out gives her any problems, if one of you says anything you're not supposed to say, I will put you in the hole. I will monkey with your probation. You just better not do a thing. And he went out, and I'd just come from the passing of the peace. And I looked at them, and this one tall woman, Alice, said, and we ain't even done nothing. And I went from my world of love and support and kindness and privilege into a place where before you do anything, you're threatened with illegal action. And they called them all thespians, and they came in muttering about that. And I said, no, thespian. And they said lesbian, okay? They said thespian in front of you. And at one point, I was allowed by the Pennsylvania Council on the Arts to buy them all beautiful date books. And they were like this, but I brought in the Shakespeare, and the women started writing their innermost thoughts in them. And then they decided they could put them in a pillow and use them as a weapon. So they took up the books, and then they would read their innermost thoughts on a loudspeaker. So it changed me. We were doing a conversation with the women about flowers, and one woman said, my mother's name was Cynthia, and I always thought for Cynthia was for my mother. And it started off so light and beautiful, and people were remembering all these flowers of their youth, and within 2 seconds, it went into sexual molestation. Oh yeah, we used to go out and pick flowers after my daddy would beat up my mother to try to make her feel good. And went on from there to the darkest places I've ever heard. One young, beautiful blonde girl said that she got hit by a bus, and she was in a cast, and her mother would go to work, and she said it was hard for me to get, she was 5, to get away from my stepdaddy because I couldn't move very fast. So I took care of her when she came out of prison, and Ray and I helped her find a place, and we brought her furniture, and she was trying to take care of her little brother, and the last I heard, her boyfriend said she went back to prison. So it changed me. It's almost like when Patty Hearst was abducted and then joined the army and was holding up a bank, you could almost look and go, well, they took her and they brainwashed her and they kept her in a dark place, and wouldn't that happen to anybody that was treated that way? And I'm not condoning violence and I'm not condoning crime, but as the prophet said, those children were in bondage and in the dark, and they were mistreated from... I had 13 women in our play, Wildflowers, and all but 2 had had sexual molestation, and the other 2 had been abused. So we put together this gorgeous play about flowers, and how those beautiful flowers of youth turn into the flowers of toxicity, and how they turn into the flowers of opium, and how those turn into... They wound up with their children, their flowers. And at the end they said, my children are my bleeding hearts, or my children are my sunflowers, or my children are... And the audience on the video, you can hear them sobbing, because they felt like they'd gotten to know these women. So that's how it changed me. I got to see the part of life that I'd never seen before. And I'd lived in New York City for 20-something years. But I kind of moved through that. I didn't really spend the time and find out that my childhood was not like your childhood, and my father was not like your father, and my mother was not like your mother. I was privileged. And when they started taking care of me when I was ill, I mean, I still came and taught, and I still did our work, but they were right there with me.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yes?
It sounds like it changed them too. Do you attribute that to kind of being in a space where they could be vulnerable, or was it having somebody respect them enough to meet them?
I finally realized, that's a great question, I finally realized what my purpose was. I didn't hold a GED class, I didn't teach a technical course, I didn't do that, but I provided a space where all of us got in touch with our own souls. Mm-hmm. And from that place, you can sign up for a course, or decide to go back to school, or decide to make a different life. We created such a safe space, and the women were so close, and the men too, but the women were almost more catty and more vicious than the men. The men would fight you, but they didn't needle you and start rumors about you and all of that. It was a different vibe. Those women got so close that when they left the class, I would have to say, put your prison face on. Not everybody is what we are. Look out for each other, but don't take your vulnerability out there. whether it was because of staff or because of other people. And one woman who became, I must say, my favorite, came down. She was as tall as that door, and she came down and she said, I want to know what's going on down here. People leave for that class and they're all laughing and having fun and looking for it, and they come back and their eyes are all red and they're weeping. And she was there, and she tried to get out. She hammered for the guard because they would lock them in with me. But she came again, and within 2 weeks was writing her life story. And it was so vivid, I would love to see it get published. She said there were 19 of us. We had to line up to get our food. And then Mama would padlock the refrigerator, and her and Daddy would go eat in the bedroom, and we'd sit wherever we could. And she was funny, and she was real, and she was talented. So the space became so safe that, and I always had them in a circle. So I wasn't like the leader of the pack. We were all just human beings together. And we always let whoever was talking talk without any interference. And then gradually we would come up with our topic. And then gradually we would start building on that story. And then we would go into the rehearsal. I would lead if I was in New York. And they were petrified. We did one called Shades of Love. And I figured out the room dividers. If I put them across here, we had a stage. I'm so clever. And we had those cloths we used again as a thing. And before I introduced them, I went back to grab the first one's hand, and all of them, all 13, grabbed my hand. They were so nervous. And then afterwards, we had a lovely brunch, desserts, and all of this. And the girls didn't know they were allowed to eat. And so I told one, I said, of course you can. That's for you. I made my muffins. That's for you. All of that. And she took a chair and she put it right at the buffet table and proceeded to eat everything in front of her. She was so thrilled, and I let her. But the guards, there were so many wonderful ones there. Oh, my goodness. And the warden, when I began, was a woman. And she said, if you can give any of them an ounce of self-confidence and self-esteem, I will back you 1,000%. So I don't mean to say that the prison was not without wonderful, wonderful, caring people. They were there, and the warden supported me, and I was very blessed in that way. But later, some of the guards were arrested and brought to justice, and that was a part of it too. I guess it's like life. You get some that are wonderful and some that aren't. Yes?
What about, did you have, could you establish what happened with these people when they were out and no longer had a safe space, when they were confronted with all of the things that people can be confronted by?
I found out why you need a community, because I tried, my husband will tell you, I tried to do a lot of it on my own. One young woman who I love dearly and still do, I waited for her when she was let out of the prison, and she wanted to get a college application, and we drove straight to the college. And then I took her out to lunch, and she went to college, and she had a beautiful high grade point average. She since has had to keep jobs going, so she had to drop out. I would meet as many people who lived in the area, and a dear friend of ours, Ann Lewis, and her church gave money, and we would go shopping for things that they needed. A lot of women were transferred onto state prison or even to federal, so they would write to me for years after. Once they were back in their life, whether it was California or wherever they lived, life would take them on. But on Mother's Day, I would get calls like my Jamaican grandmother would call me on Mother's Day from Jamaica and call me her mother. And I went, now wait a minute, Janet, you're not calling me your mother. So it needed a structure. Oddly enough, in Scranton, there are 2 or 3 homes and organizations to support the men coming out, but not for the women. It was almost like one of the women in the government said, it's almost like women weren't supposed to be bad. So that was the next obstacle, to try to find money and resources to carry on. But I do know that a difference was made, and I do know from all the letters I received that people got back in touch with who they really were. And what comforts me is I read one time that whatever is good and lives on forever. And you may never see the results of it. You may never know what happened. But I can look back in my life to people I wouldn't know where to find them. And something they said to me in passing, something that they did for me, that they may not even remember, changed my life. So I take a lot of comfort in that. And I've been asked to do some prison work down in Florida now. And I've done years and years and years without rescues. Years and years. And I think Cindy and I lost our brother when he was 17. And he was such a great guy. I mean, he wrote, he played music, he was smart, he was handsome. But the first time I went into a high school to do a residency after he died, and I saw those tall, rangy 17-year-old boys going by, I realized that I had an affinity to work with young people. And I wanted to, and girls and boys, but there was something about, at that time, those high school boys, when Kenny got that close to high school graduation and didn't, because he passed away. So, like I said, and then those kids grew up and I wasn't afraid anymore of adults. I thought they're just the same ones, they're just as old as I mean, they got older just like me, so.
When you began this, did you just approach the system and say, I want to do this, or did you
actually,
use
I had done
church
so
as a
many.
foil?
Yeah, I actually had done so much work without risk and adjudicated teenagers. The Pennsylvania Council of the Arts, and I'm sure Connecticut has of the arts here too, joined together with a local organization, and it was suggested I might go in just for 20 days, which is the usual length of a residency, 5 days a week for 4 weeks. And after that was done, the warden came to me and said, if I have to take money out of my own pocket, you're going to be here. And I wound up working 6 years with the prison. So, and then I moved to Florida. So it became, Ray would pick me up because it was hard to get parking, and every time I got in the car I'd go, this was the best day. This was the day. He would go, yep, well, can't wait for tomorrow. But when I would walk outside those doors and I would see, there's nothing like hospital wings or prisons that are so lickety-split clean, and yet they're not home. They don't feel like this. There's something that is just clean and stark. And I would walk out and I'd go, flowers. And I'd only been in there for my work day. Oh, a tree. I mean, that's also transforming when we take so much for granted. And I have found out that gratitude is the key to life. That's what I learned there also. What they would have given to... One time I brought in little paper journals for them when they couldn't keep their books. And the girls were all smelling and going, oh, it smells new, it smells like outside. You know, we just lose that sometimes with all the things we have. We're just smelling some paper that's brand new.
Is anyone in Scranton doing similar to what you did now?
I don't think so. My friend who was the visual artist is not. And there became new management, new warden, and the biggest aim there was to have a safe and secure prison. Forget the safe part, secure.
She said, forget the safe part, just so long as it's secure.
Secure is the big deal. Yeah. It was almost like this was transformative, and yet can't have it.
in Connecticut here, when I first came to Connecticut back in '56, we had, in Cheshire, we had a reformatory, which is, for crimes that were not that bad. And those boys were so well trained. I had all my grandmother's caned chairs recaned by the inmates, and everything that needed help as far as manual labor, I took to the reformatory, and a beautiful job. And those guys went out and got jobs. Now they're not doing this at all in the reformatories. Yeah. I guess there's no money, or there's no time, or I don't know.
People feel punitive about people that have broken the law. And I can understand, if you've been hurt or robbed, I can understand that. But in a general way, people, by and large, are not so much into rehabilitation. But when I would bring in, and I brought in great drama, like Waiting for Godot by Samuel Beckett. And when they first opened Waiting for Godot in Paris, the audience walked out by and large because they didn't get it. They did it in San Quentin. Our friend was the warden in San Quentin when I was a child living in California. And he said that the inmates started laughing. They got it right off the bat. So when I brought it in and we read it in the prison class, the men went, "This was me last night." And they laughed. And so I brought in the Green Eyes, the famous play about prison by Jean. I'm losing my mind right now. And we acted that out. We did. It was. They got it. They understood. And the best talent you've ever found, because I heard To Be or Not to Be done in a way I still have chills thinking about it. Sekou, the one that was hugging me, he talked about it because he knew what that was. And instead of a dagger, he went, devoutly to be wished. And it was mesmerizing. I mean, they had that stuff inside that needed to come out. And they learned discipline. So it was a great thing, but there was no will necessarily to keep it going.
A couple of our prison interns were part of the program at Wesleyan, that Wesleyan runs at one of the prisons, and they do Dante.
I saw, I don't know if it was 60 Minutes or something like that, all of the lifers, not on death row, but they were lifers, and they were one by one in a cell, and they could stick their head out like this. And a literature teacher from Northwestern would come and read Macbeth to them. And they totally understood. And there was this visual of her reading, and then after that, they'd ask questions and they'd have comments. So I learned with my faith that all things are possible and all can be forgiven if you just turn and, as your pastor said today, and turn a new way. And I had that proven to me time and time and time again, that once they had trust, they just opened up their hearts. So it was some of the best days of my life, and I look forward to doing it again.
Amen.